Us off. We are so happy to be here to talk to you about OpenAI today. This is our second event on OpenAI, and this just keeps getting bigger. We have over 450 people that are registered for this event. The excitement is palpable, and for good reason. This is a transformative time in the history of AI, and it's a fantastic opportunity for us to talk about how this can be made real in your businesses. I was talking with another company this morning, and one of the things that really came up in that conversation, that the person who was the CEO of the company mentioned that he didn't see this transformation coming so quickly. And I don't think he's alone. I think most of us didn't see this transformation coming so quickly. Many of the companies that we've engaged over the years, we've been doing AI for well over 5 or 6 years, and many companies historically have had a hard time connecting AI from something that they thought of as science fiction into something that's a real practical business capability that they can use to accomplish benefits for their customers, partners, and employees. And the advent of ChatGPT, to a certain extent, became that moment where everybody said, wow, this is a thing. This is something that's really real that can make a difference in my business. And there's certainly a certain amount of questions or concerns or just trying to understand how I even apply it in an appropriate way, or a way that I can make get the lowest hanging fruit as opposed to the one I have to climb the ladder to get. But those are really accomplishable things. So this event today is a great opportunity for us to talk through where we have customers that are already doing this and already either piloting or in production. We're going to demo use cases, we're going to show you live examples, and we're going to tell you how you get started. So as we get going here, the first thing I want to do is have you meet the presenters. Just tell you a little bit about ourselves. We want to connect with you. If you have questions after this, if you want to know more about this, follow us on Twitter, follow us on LinkedIn, connect with us, ask us questions. We want to be an asset to the community. We're here to help take this capability within the market and help it become something that all businesses can take advantage of. In a sense that like the rising tide floats all boats. So if I'll start by introducing myself. I'm Concurrency's Chief Technology Officer. I'm Nathan Lesnowski. I've been with Concurrency for about 20 years. I'm a 13-time Microsoft MVP. And that's been an interesting journey because the technologies that I've worked with for those 13 years have transformed over time. Been in consulting for 21 years, and I'm also a two-time Ironman. I have 8 kids, a wonderful family, and you can see there that my daughters and son are also involved in triathlons. And the reason I bring that up is because have for the time I've been in consulting and for the time I've been competing in athletic and sports and things of that nature, one of the things I've really learned is that I'm not always the smartest person in the room, and I'm usually not the fastest person at the race. And to a certain degree, I just have to be okay with that. And why that's important to this conversation is that we're always in a position where we're sort of sharing the things that we know and learning from someone that knows something else. And what our goal on this conversation is to do is to just simply share some of the experiences that we've had with OpenAI and with AI capabilities and the customers that we've worked with. And one of the things that's really unique about this journey is we always learn something new when we engage somebody like yourselves, because the unique things that we bring to the table when we engage a customer is usually, data scientist capabilities and engineering and project management and how to get this done in an effective way. But the really cool thing is all these businesses are the experts at their business. And it's been really fascinating to learn how these businesses tick and how AI can be applied in a really unique way to each organization. And that's what I'm excited to share some examples of today, and also excited to learn more about from all of you. So let's move to our next person, who is Lewin Meng.
Hey everyone, I'm Luan Mong. I'm the principal architect here at Concurrency, and I do fun stuff, right? At Concurrency and outside of Concurrency. I wrote a book once, never in my life I will do it again, but that's fun. It's a good book. But typically, I actually, involve myself in the reason, story of why we do certain things, right? Why we do AI, why we do, type of solutions, and why to me is more important in my journey as an architect and as a long time developer, right? With about 5 years of experience, is that in this particular case, in this particular story and the journey, why is what actually reason, is the reason for making a new product or making a new service, right? We know how to do, using the technology, right? We know what technology to use and how to use it. It's a why to actually solve these issues where the fun is, right? So in my free time, I do things like robotics. I, deal with my own self lawnmower, right, that I can control from back in the day, Windows Phone and stuff like that, to do cars and self driving, how to tweak it, that kind of things are where my fun is. Obviously, my latest fun is my son, right? He's now 3 years old, so he's no longer that size anymore. But yeah, this is where we are at, and I would love to engage with you guys in terms of the future of technology, future of where things are going, and why you want to get there. And I will actually teach you the what's and hows to get there with, right? And tell us why, and we'll get there together. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Lewin. All right, our next person to introduce here is Alessandro Fernandez. He is our lead data scientist. He also happens to have the best picture of the entire group. He kind of looks like either a hero or a Bond villain. I'm not sure which, but welcome, Alessandro.
It's always good to keep people guessing, right? So my name is Alexandre. So just to comment on the speed of this transformation in the NLP space that Nathan just mentioned. I remember reading the "All Attention is All You Need" paper from even 2017 describing the transformer architecture. Even as recent as 2021, transformer architectures were seen almost like a toy when you compare it to industrial scale NLP solutions. What is exciting about this time is that the GPT class of transformers are now bringing the transformer architecture in a realm where you apply to real business problems and you drive real value through the NLP, the classic NLP workflows very, very quickly. And I'll comment on it on how much of a speed up it's been using this technology compared to some more of the classical approaches. I usually dabble a lot on NLP and large language models, as well as time series, and also ML ops, which is usually the DevOps DevOps plus all of the machine learning resources that you need to have a machine learning system working all together. And on my free time, I am a chess enthusiast. So for those of you out there who play chess, feel free to send a match request and let's have some fun.
Thanks, Alessandre. And our last introduction is Mac. Mac has been involved in the development side of these projects. If you're catching a theme, is that there's a team approach to solve these problems. So Mac, just introduce yourself real briefly.
Sure, thank you. My name is Matt Kravitz. I'm a senior software developer here at Concurrency. And like mentioned, I spend a lot of my time integrating these applications, work hand in hand with these three gentlemen here to bring the latest and greatest to whatever and whomever business may need something. So that's really my role. I, like Lewin, focus on the how and the what and the why. I don't write books for fun. I will say.
I don't know if anybody does.
But well, he does. He's better than I am. So, but for fun, I'm a big fan of Formula One. So that's really where I focus my my time off, if you'll say. But thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Mac. All right, so let's get into it. So what we're going to talk about today is a little bit about the large language model business cases that you can expect in the context of your organizations. And then I'm going to broaden this to some other AI scenarios, and then we're going to dive into showing you some examples. So what you see in front of you are examples of conversations or in-flight projects or in production projects that are happening with OpenAI right now. And I'm going to start from the left to the right. So if you kind of consider these left couple use cases, customer service request automation, order status and action, these are examples of implementations that are focused on the where's my truck, where's my order, how do I do this? What if I have to change? Can I change my order? I have a problem with the product that's been delivered. Can you modify that product for me? It's all about easing the way the customer engages with you to provide a different customer experience and helping them to achieve an outcome faster than they would have achieved before. And oftentimes, asynchronous conversations with a customer can really improve their customer experience because they don't have to sit on hold. They don't have to be in a position where they're kind of moving from expert to expert. You can give them that ability to do something else while you're helping them solve their problem. Or in some cases, and we'll show you some examples of this, in some cases of this, it's also about maybe arming a customer service representative with the information so they can answer the question faster. So rather than having a scenario where like you call in that person, you're talking to that customer service representative, and it takes them a long time to find the answer because they have a real amalgamation of different tools. We've been using things like OpenAI to be able to retrieve and amalgamate that information so a customer service rep can answer the question faster. So that's a really interesting use case that seems to be popping up quite a bit. This next use case is about taking information from a customer and building a quote in a way that requires knowledge of the unique understanding of your organization and is something that can sometimes be hard to train, and accelerating the ability to produce that quote and get that information back to your customer. And that could be in a lot of different types of product lines. It could be in lumber. It could be in composites. It could be in terms of a complex window sale. There's a lot of different scenarios that are coming to fore here. And oftentimes those requests for quote, they don't come over in really structured ways. It might come through an email. It might come through a chat. It might come through a phone call. There's a lot of different ways that you might receive that information. And what we're seeing as a theme in this particular space is reducing the time to produce a quote that has high accuracy. And as a result of doing that, many businesses that produce a lot of quotes and produce a lot of quotes that are either repeatable or require combining a different set of pieces together, they can improve the ability for them to deliver the quotes in a drastically reduced amount of time, say like hours down to minutes. And they can improve the ability for them to onboard new employees. We have a customer that we're working with and has 600 sales reps. And those 600 sales reps have to produce quotes on a consistent basis. And being able to produce that quote requires a lot of knowledge of the organization. So ramping a new person up to do that can be really complicated. But using capabilities like this have an ability to be able to provide that answer much more quickly and do it in the context of the interface they're comfortable using. So we'll show you an example of that later on. The next example, and this has been probably the most popular story, the most popular use case that we've been seeing, mostly because it's a relatively low-hanging fruit, is the idea of data mining. And this really fits into two different types of ideas. The most simple idea is things like customer service manuals or support, where you're like surfacing content, surfacing documents for someone to be able to get their answer more quickly. So think of like, for example, I have a boat, and that boat has a light that comes on in that boat. This happened to me. I was about to take the kids out on the water. I have a light that comes on in the boat. I'm looking for the old paper manual. I'm trying to figure out what that means. I'm calling up the boating company that I bought the boat from. Finally, I'm going to Fleet Farm looking for a lubricant that I've never used before. And I waste 4.5 hours trying to figure this out. Well, data mining is a use case where can I ask a question to an intelligent bot and have it provide me an answer versus me having to do the mining myself? Just give me the metal, right? So data mining can really accelerate our ability to be able to provide value back to a customer or to a customer service person that's giving that information back. So data mining is a use case that's become really popular, and we'll show you an example of that as well. Even more complicated cases might be, tell me about my top 10 customers. Now, that's not just a question that's being asked. It's also the potential of combining that with a query that's made to a business system or some kind of other set of work that has to be done to be able to provide the answer back, which is also something you can do through the data mining engine. And then the next scenario is things like invoice processing automation, or any kind of, I guess I would say, any repeatable process, something you do a lot, is a great use case for you to take a look at using these kinds of capabilities. This is a scenario where there's a very low-hanging fruit, where If you do something enough times, you can start to build tools that can automate that process and allow for the repeatable process to be done and just deal with the exceptions. So these are all scenarios that that we're doing right now, and we can show examples of in this conversation today. Now, if you look at that in the context of broader stories, so this left-hand side is, of course, the ones we just talked about. The right-hand side talks about other types of scenarios that might be in the AI space, such as supply chain optimization or predictive maintenance. And in between each of these, sometimes you have crossovers, such as building a smart product that kind of brings information from the broader deployment base that kind of gives you information about what's out there that you're querying from a conversational engine. Or maybe you're doing a sustainability play where you're trying to understand the basis of your deployment base and how I can lower emissions. All of that might be the combination of a conversational interface and what you're doing from perhaps like a math type interface where you're bringing that information together. So this has become something that's really fascinating. Sometimes people are starting on the right hand side where they're starting with, say, demand inventory forecasting and optimization. And sometimes they're starting on the left-hand side where they're starting with surfacing easy information for customer service reps. And maybe oftentimes they meet in the middle. You start to get one that they can really be fed by the other and vice versa. So this is the first example I'm going to show you. This is a example of a basically surfacing manual data to a chat interface that makes it easier for a customer to be able to get information about a product. So this is for a boating company, and we trained it on their live PDFs that are on their website right now. So you go and tell me about the Sundancer 370. And you can see right here that it's giving you a pretty good answer about the Sundancer 370. But one of the things that's different about this than what you would see in a, if you go out to ChatGPT right now, is I'm embedding the citation of the document that I use to train the model. So this citation is used to be able to indicate where I'm getting that information. And it can even open it up on the right-hand side for me to be able to understand and see it. And as you continue to ask questions, I get more information, such as what the draft is, or an interesting question here, which is the maximum speed. Now, what's fascinating about that question of maximum speed is that I didn't ask what is the wide open throttle speed. I asked what is the maximum speed, but it seems to have understood that. So it understands that the wide open throttle speed is 42 to 44 miles an hour, whereas the maximum speed, which is the same thing I asked, but different language, it was able to translate to. And you can see that in this document, the wide open throttle is right there. So we took this document, which was not something that ChatGPT had been trained on, and we used a model to be able to produce this in the context of a customer-friendly interface that someone can take advantage of. And this could be something that would be internal, an internal customer service rep could take advantage of to be able to answer questions. A distributor could use to be able to answer questions, a salesperson, or even giving it to the customer themselves. And the goal of something like this is to be able to reduce the time and energy that an individual needs to be able to answer a question. I was listening to a podcast just recently on this topic, and the person who was talking about it said that this kind of intuitive answering of the question is something that people always wanted from search, but the technology wasn't there to deliver it, and now it's there. We had kind of adapted to how we had gone into more of like a document or a link discovery approach to search. Now we've really gotten to a point where I can truly just ask a question of something I've trained, and I can give it interesting information. One of the other interesting things about this, however, is this also brings up, as you go live with something like this, it brings up scenarios that you really have to think about, such as like training on what does it actually mean to have a draft of a boat. So I could say the draft of a boat is 42 inches with the stern drive down. If I ask this bot, how deep can I go in the water with this boat? It wouldn't understand that question because it doesn't understand that draft equals how deep I can go in the water. That's something I have to tell it about. So that's where you start to get this really great sort of entry point of, oh, this is really cool. It's doing something way better than what I did before. And then it gets people's wheels turning, and you realize there's other questions I need to answer along the way. So this is an example of using this in production. Another example would be something like this. This is a lumber company that is really interested in allowing their contractors to be able to order wood and have it shipped to their sites that they're doing work, and simply allowing them to be able to say, I need to order 40 pallets of 2x4s weather treated. No problem. Here's your order. It's created. Delivery date is this. Allowing them to create a new order, cancel an order, get a refund. The difference between something like this is from traditional chat interfaces is a lot of traditional chat interfaces, they surface like 5 options in the context of the chat, and that's all you can really do. What's changing the game is I can have a legitimate conversation in the context of the chat interface, and that drives a whole different level of acceptance of the interface. So this kind of goes to this, which is really the typical pattern that you're seeing with most of these conversational AI platforms, which is you have some type of request, and that type of request is customer could be an external customer, a B2B customer, an internal customer. And in order for this to continue, it needs to be a satisfying communication experience. And that's where most traditional bots had fallen down. It wasn't a satisfying communication experience for the level of conversation that you were trying to drive. Maybe some traditional ones, they were able to accomplish basic things, but it wasn't able to accomplish something that felt like a human. So it very quickly moved from here to, I want to talk to a hero. I'm trying to zero out to get to the person. In this case, I can do high degree of value answer retrieval by pulling from either what I've been trained on or directly to the business system interface and pulling information back to the customer. And if I'm doing that well, then I sort of earn the right to be able to take action upon that. So perhaps the conversation is, I incorrectly booked my room at the hotel for today. Actually, I accidentally booked it for next week when I was supposed to book it for today. Can you tell me I'm at the hotel? I seem to have booked this for the wrong day. Is that correct? Yup. Sorry, you booked it for the wrong day. Can I reschedule to today? That's a complex action. That might even take a human interaction, but it's something that I can tell the bot to do. That engages a business system interface that does something with it. So much more easy to handle if I'm just interacting with that from my app than me having to physically call someone, whoever's there, for them to be able to do the work of changing my reservation, especially when I booked it through one of the kind of intermediary platforms. So you can see how that kind of line of communication becomes a common part of how we do this successfully. So this is an example of that data mining or customer service kind of combined scenario. We're at the top here. We have a Q&A interface where we're asking a question. And then below, we surface a more complex output. So rather than just being a chat interface, I'm using kind of chat integration to be able to ask the question, but I'm going to give a complex state of the order back to the person that requested. So the ultimate outcome to the customer doesn't always need to be like, and you'll see from the demo from Lewin, it doesn't need to be just a basic chat experience. It can actually be complex output that's delivered to the customer that provides them with a much more consistent experience for the kind of thing that they need to learn. And so in this case, it's like a complex order delivery of a product to a contractor, and they need to know when is that coming and how is it coming. And in this case, the contractor needs to understand a lot of details about it. And that's something that you can arm both the customer service rep or the direct contractor with and enable them with the information that they need in order to be able to answer it quickly. So what brings all this together is ultimately understanding the unique language of your business. All 3 of these scenarios in front of you are unique language that a business runs on. Metal, Windows, insurance. All 3 of these scenarios are unique to what makes your business special. And everyone on this call has something about your business that's special. When someone joins your organization, even if they know your industry, there's probably something they need to learn about your business. And that unique thing is oftentimes what we're training a platform like OpenAI on. We're taking the things that aren't on the internet, the things that are unique to you that allow you to do the quoting or do the customer service or have the conversation with the customer or construct the engineered order, and put that into a position where you can deliver it back to the customer, but do it in a way that starts to take some of the hard training work out and use this as the vehicle to be able to optimize the processes in conjunction with a human. That bottom example is one that I just practically lived. My daughter is 16 and going on 17, and she is now a driver. And I had to add her to our driving policy. And I called up the insurance agent and I was like, okay, cool. I want to add her. And what does it cost? And what are my discounts? And what's better for me to add to this car to this car? And she's not going to be driving very often. So is there any benefits to, she's only driving a couple days a week. So it's not, is there some reduction or something? And the person didn't know how to answer the question, which I was already kind of stunned by. Like, he didn't know how to answer that relatively quickly, couldn't quote it quickly, had to call me back, ultimately didn't call me back. And then I get a letter in the mail that, like, my daughter has been dropped from the insurance policy. I'm like, I never even entered the insurance policy. And I ultimately called him back and I get a different person and he asked me to answer the question and get back to me. And I'm thinking this whole time, like, man, what a repeatable process that could have been made so much easier with an asynchronous conversation. Would never have had to even talk to a person. Like, I've got an app for that insurance carrier. What if I could just ask them the question? Wow, like, transformative type of difference to how I could have gotten the question answered, especially in terms of making my experience as a consumer better. And that's really what we're trying to do, is make the end customer or the customer service rep or the process that I'm doing internally easier and more conducive to delivering great work. So ultimately, to do this, you end up breaking these capabilities down into pieces. And that's where the data science comes in. That's where you're taking your unique language and bringing people that understand what's happening within the box to the table to be able to solve the problems. So this is an example of an interface that's built around taking a set of products and consuming that in a way that lets you then create a quote. So you can see right here, there's a set of product that's asked for an email that then gets extracted using OpenAI to be able to understand this is the actual thing that we're interested in quoting. And then what happens is that gets consumed into producing an order that the human then can accept or modify before it goes back to a customer. And what that's doing is taking a lot of hard work and it's producing back something that can be used by a human that may understand that industry really well or may not understand that industry really well, and somewhere in between, and enabling them to do the hard work and then interact with a person they're trying to engage with as a human. And where this is really driving improvement is taking that time to produce that quote down to a much shorter period of time, because we can incorporate cost of metal, what's available, what's the right product for the ask, understanding the ask from the customer and putting it together into a document. All those things we don't really need to be doing. Like, especially if you play with ChatGPT, there's so much that it can just do if you give it a very minimal amount of information. And by pulling all this together, we can optimize many of the processes that exist within a business, especially this one, in the case of which it reduced their time to quote substantially. You can also see something interesting about this, which is that it's integrated within the Outlook interface. So oftentimes, the projects that we're doing with companies, they want to integrate it into the core interface that people live in all the time. I'm working with a travel agency, and they're integrating OpenAI into their team's experience because that's where their travel agents work. They live in teams. Rather than build some other experience, ChatGPT for them is now right within the team's experience. So they can answer questions as people are asking about potential travel opportunities right within the team's experience. Tell me 10 things about where I should go fishing in Iceland. Awesome. Like, I can actually leverage OpenAI directly for that. Pull that right into the team's experience, right where they're living and working. So I think it's interesting to note that OpenAI has dramatically changed the game on how quickly we can do these things. So I would love for Alessandre, for you to talk a little bit about, when you look at problems that you had traditionally solved without OpenAI, how is this starting to accelerate your process of solving some of these challenges?
I can use the very real sort of example we keep coming across over and over. And so traditionally, NLP methods required an enormous amount of data to get going. And this is because the variability in which natural language appears. So you would usually need an enormous amount of data. And the reason is that the machine learning for classic methods, you would need to first teach it how to read, and then teach it to read the very specific data you have at hand. And then the third step of performance is perform the very specific activity that you want the machine learning to perform. So with GPT models, they are transformer class, meaning there's something like transfer learning happen, meaning older transformers already knew how to read. So you really didn't need to a ton of data, but you still needed a medium size of data. How the GPT OpenAI models changed the game is that not only they can read and comprehend extremely well, but they already come with most times functionality out of the box. So with no training and just the proper prompt, very often you get pretty decent results out of the GPT model. And just having these powerful models at hand that can get you, some decent results on some very specific workflows in a week rather than 8 months. And why is it a week versus 8 months? In the old way, in the classic machine learning way, you would need very high quality training data. So that would mean humans having to go through and annotate or classify large amounts of data. Now, one example is we are using the GPT models themselves to annotate data for us. So a process that used to take a person 1,000, so let's say one example of one data point. A process that used to take a person 8 hours to produce 1,000 training examples, we can have a simple GPT, like out of the box GPT, producing 60,000 in the same amount of time. And that's sort of this anywhere from 20 to 60 time speed improvement in producing data sets is what we're seeing with this technology. So really the speeding up of the workflows and designing from system design to system deployment, the increase in speed is really in multiple different directions that we're seeing today.
Thanks, Alessandre. Can you talk a little bit through this very recent example of how OpenAI accelerated a piece of a problem, and how that kind of changed the game in a sense of how we could address a particular part of it?
Yes. So we had this very specific need from a business to be able to take invoices and pull very specific information out of invoices. And one thing that the GPT models do really, really well that really did not exist before is taking text that is completely unstructured and structuring it in a table. And you can do this yourself today. So you could take, for example, just find your best recipe for any cooking that you like from the internet, paste it on ChatGPT and ask it to create a table of ingredients. And you will see this capability firsthand. But for this particular case, for this business case, this is a sort of invoice that we need to be able to target very specific information and pull it in a table format. So OCR methods have been around for quite a while, and they're very good at taking a well-structured document like this and pulling text that is not, the text is accurate, very accurate, as you can see, but all of the structure that you had before is gone. And just a proof of concept, that invoice was actually an image, so it wasn't really even a PDF format. So we can do that very well. The next point is, so OCR wasn't enough for this particular use case. We needed something else to then target very specific information. So for this use case, the specific information is all you really need is quantity, the description of the items, and associated prices. So a GPT model with no training, so out of the box, we basically inserted this little bit of text that you see in the screen and was able to produce a table that looks like what you see on the right side. So now we have a GPT-enabled OCR system. So start to finish, we are now able to build the systems where we'll have an initial OCR piece, followed by a OpenAI resource that allows us to very, very specifically target specific parts of it. It can be invoices, but it really could be any document of your choosing. So if you see your business has a need to go through these documents that can vary in structure, and you have to have very accurate and specific information out of them, and you want them at scale, this is something that we can build and deploy.
Awesome. Thank you, Alessandre.
Mm-hmm.
So a scenario that we touched on a little earlier that's very similar to the OCR or the customer service scenario, but is more about existing documents, is that data mining scenario. And that's one that was used for producing that boat manual scenario, as well as other ones that are about producing information from existing data sources, especially document data sources or databases that contain information that we can surface. Similar kind of work pattern. You wouldn't necessarily always think it, but it is a very similar kind of work pattern to getting a question, providing a satisfying response, retrieving information, and maybe even doing something with it. So an example of this would be, hey, I have an error code in my F-150 truck. What do I do with this error? I'm confused at looking at the manuals. No problem. With that truck model and error code, the certified manual suggests a spark plug misfire. That would be a great example of where we might be able to address a question for a customer very quickly, surface that information based upon trained information, either for the actual rep themselves. Is something, of course, even mechanics have challenges with. Well, how do they fix problems? Well, sometimes they know, sometimes they're just Googling. There's tons of Stack Overflow equivalents for mechanics. We happen to be working with a large machine repair company right now that has the same exact scenario where they have all these historical manuals, they have all this historical data, and they need to arm their mechanics to be able to solve problems faster. And this is really about helping them to be more effective, and then driving that in conjunction with their parts management system. So in order to do things like that, I love, Alessandre, if you could talk a little bit about the 4 different ways or 3 different ways that we go about training or even like configuring a OpenAI environment to be able to do what we needed to do.
Right. So these are the main 3 workflows that you can build with OpenAI, Azure OpenAI resources. So I'll go through the 3 briefly. So prompting means just taking a GPT model as is with no training and just try to get it to do what you want it to do, but basically describing the task. And these prompts can be as soon as answer in a polite way to something much more involved, which is answer this question only assuming that you have the proper context to answer this question. And if you don't know how to answer this question and that information does not exist in the context, do not guess, reply with, I don't know. So that is an example of prompting. The new ChatGPT version in Azure, which is called the GPT 3.5 Turbo, that has a specific field called a system field that is where you put your prompts as you're building a system. So that has a very dedicated spot to it. So and this is the lowest hanging fruit to getting results with Azure OpenAI, because you do not have to train a model. You're just using a model's capability as is. You do not need training data. because your prompting is your prompting takes care of how you want the task done, what the output format is, etc. So this is the fastest way to get results, and usually is what we go to first, just to see, is GPT the right technology for this problem? Usually if the answer is yes, prompt gets us to an acceptable result, so acceptable levels of performance given the time investment. So the second part is embedding, and that is embedding context into a prompt. And a lot of the ways we do this is through something called indexing. So let's say, so with prompting, there's a limit to how much information you can put in a prompt before either a question is answered or a functionality gets done. And I think it's about 4,000 tokens, so it's not a lot. But imagine you had thousands of manuals. So this could be product manuals. You cannot take 1,000 text from 1,000 manuals and put that into every question that you ask your system. So this is where embedding comes in, and it's basically you use something like an ADA model to read all of your documents. And what that will do is it will create an embedded version of these documents. So then when a question comes in or when a task comes in, there will be a pre-embedding step where you take what you're trying to do and you compare it to the group of documents that you have, and you will find certain relevant bits of information, and you will automatically pull that into your question. And that is how the system would then arrive to the final answer. This has been very, very successful for the data mining scenario that Nathan mentioned. So if you have a large amount of documents and you just want some simple answers out of those documents, embedding is almost sure the way to solve that. There's other niche use cases too. So imagine a database with 1,000 tables, and schemas are well defined for that database. And you want a GPT to be able to answer some simple questions like, what is the average of sales for the month of December? And you don't want that person to have to reach out to a SQL developer to then give them the answer. They want the person to interact with a bot that can get them that answer. One other way that we've sort of identified another workflow, which is taking natural language, automatically turning into a SQL query, letting the SQL query your database directly, and then retrieving that information back. So that is a very interesting use case that you don't see very often, but it's made for this technology. And then the final little piece here is fine tuning, which I would say is probably the one that takes the longest to get right. It is the ones that's probably also the most cost, and it is very, very scenario specific. So let's say you have a prompt engineering solution, and that prompt solution is, let's say someone has a description of a window, and that system has to this very specific, I have to understand what the thickness of the window is. That's a very well-defined task. So for prompts, let's say you try 1,000 descriptions and you got 10 of them correct, 10 of them incorrect. Because you are not training your own model, how do you then fix those 10 mistakes? Sometimes 10 mistakes in 1,000 is okay, but for some other applications, that is not acceptable. That's where fine-tuning comes in. Fine-tuning allows you to train a GPT model to do a very, very narrow specific task, but it will do it to an unbelievable amount of performance, where you could throw 10,000 descriptions of a window and you would not miss one where you would need the thickness of it or something. With a fine-tuned model, you're going to lose performance on basically every single other capability that it has. And the trade-off is that the very specific capability you trained for is unreal, is the level of performance. So for this very last thing, it basically needs to be a very targeted and very sort of modularized. And this is an example of doing, so if you go back one slide real quick. So the embedding example I went through in purple there, the next slide is an example of that. So you see the Azure OpenAI GPT down there. That is the untrained GPT model. The data sources here, it could be a SQL database, it could be blob storage, it really could be anywhere where your documents are at. And this is a Microsoft demo. What these guys used for the indexer and for indexing and for searching is something called Azure Cognitive Search. You can also use Ada for this process as well. So you have some options on which part of the system basically pulls relevant information, but then everything else is the same. So you need an app orchestrator, app server orchestrator, and so that is the part of the system that integrates UX. That could be an Outlook plugin. It could be a Teams plugin. It could be a web app. It could be a Power App. You could serve this in any format you like, and then the orchestrator is in charge of taking all of these systems have been built to front the results to a consumer. And all the consumer would see really is just a chatbot that's very good at answering, let's say, HR questions or benefits questions or questions on manuals of products that you have exposed through this Azure Cognitive Service service.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we are going to pivot now into having students from live demos. So Lewin is going to take the first shot at this. Lewin, you're going to cover a demo about ordering a window. And one other thing I would note as we do this is keep on asking those questions in the chat. We'll either hit them in the chat or we'll have some time at the end as well to answer numerous questions. So keep them coming from that standpoint. Thanks for asking them. Go ahead, Lewin.
Yeah, there
You
are
can
a few
steal the
questions.
screen.
Yeah, I will. There are a few questions you guys asked already in the chat, right, regarding things like security. Alessandro will cover that, hallucination, right? Those will be coming up shortly. I'm going to talk about the use cases and how we can do it. So I'm going to steal the screen right now and go from there. All right, we're going to talk about Windows real quick. Can you guys see my screen? Should be pretty wide right now.
Yep, looking good.
Okay, one of the things that I want you guys to look at this real quick, right? There are rows and grids that we're going to talk about in a bit too. But right now, we'll start with the email. It doesn't have to start as an email like Nathan was talking about, right? We can start it off as a chatbot. We can start it off as a Teams bot. It doesn't matter. This is one way of starting it. In my case, I'm going to start it off as an email because, well, might as well. It's one way of doing it. I can launch a bot from here. So I'm going to actually, I don't need this anymore. This can go away. So bottom line is this, right? We actually have an email that pretty much says, I have a particular white opening in my house and I'm in the middle of shopping for windows, right? What can I actually fit in this 12-foot by, whatever, right? That height and width that I have to an 1/8 of an inch area. And behind the scene, ChatGPT did a few things. It actually went and searched on our warehouse, and I actually searched on our a number of different tables and said, hey, the most efficient economic way, the keyword here be economic, right, is to put in a bunch of little smaller windows across, and I want to do that in the most demand for color as well. In this case, it's black, right? Like here, everybody's ordering black, frames nowadays in this current market. So that's what they're doing. It's actually say, hey, this is what you want. Funny enough, right? I think, my wife wouldn't like that. I mean, it's a little too cluttered and it looks too prison-like, right? Like, it's like, I feel like, it kind of remind me of me living back in the dorm days, like too tight. I'm going to say, something like, can you modify this for me and see what happens? I mean, this thing is a data that comes out. We can actually render it, right? It comes out nicely, etc. On a window, right? So I'm going to say something like, let's, I'll reference the closeness part too. It goes. Notice that I have misspellings. I have other things on here, right? The context here is that GPT will actually understand my whole context of what I'm going to ask and actually figure it out, right? And see what happens on this particular case. I ask, it feels too much like a prison. Can you do this in a slightly different format? And GPT also come back and ask me another question. Say, do you live in any of these states? Because depending on where I'm living, right, it may have constraints. For example, if I live in Florida, when there is hurricanes, they actually have different rules that governs it, right? For Dade County, for example, that says, hey, I need it to be of particular thickness with particular strength. So I may not be able to join two windows together. So let's put it on the worst case scenario, right? I'm going to say I live in Key West. See what happens. It went back, figured it out, and told me this is what it might look like. Well, it looks nice, right? I mean, this is good. It actually understood that I want one wider selection in the middle with two smaller things flanking it. I kind of like it, but it looks a little too plain, right? I'm actually going to ask for lines on the window. I mean, people seen these, essentially I want to see what else it can come up with, right? Remember that I also told them that I don't want it to look too cluttered as well. So I'm going to see if it can remember the context that I was telling earlier. Yep. It actually knows that these are not lines. I see it as lines, right? Like this is me as a consumer telling me that, hey, I want to see lines on it. As it turns out, these are what they call grills, right, in the industry. So they actually say, hey, I can put grills for you. This is what it might look like. What do you think about these? I can at this point say, hey, you know what? I kind of like this, right? I mean, well, all right, today. I can actually go to that and it actually look up a few things and it says, hey, I'm going to go to warehouse and see whether if I have it in stock, if I can make it, etc. It can do things like, hey, you know what? If you do it right now, right, it will take 6 to 8 weeks. If you order it in white, it might be a little easier because there are more supplies, or I can actually, jump the production line, what have you, right? So I can say, hey, can I do it in white? I can render it in white and say yes. Right? And then I can continue on and I can actually transfer to another bot, right? That takes over and go to the actual ordering system and move along this particular, process. This actually gives you, right, a lot easier ways to interact with it. In this particular industry, right, you're looking at multitudes of different permutations that you can actually, deal with. It takes a lot of human errors out of it, and it actually also helps get the process done quicker using a particular data set that is pertaining to this particular, company, right? In this case, a make-believe company, but it is now staying within that data set of that, right? Privacy of the data stays within that particular constraint. It doesn't get leaked to the external users as well, right? So let's say if you want to start another company, they can't just take this and run with it. All right, I'll get back to the to Nathan.
Awesome, thanks, Lewin. And I think Mac was the mastermind behind a lot of that. So thank you, Mac, for the work on that one. And we're going to talk now with Alessandra. Alessandra, you're going to do a little bit of a demo on teaching OpenAI.
Yeah, so it's like a get started demo. So yeah, let me share my screen here. All right, can everyone see my screen?
Yep.
All right, so let's say you want to get started with this technology and you want to see what the capability is on Azure today. So I broke it into sort of 4 steps here. So the first step is for OpenAI accessibility, you do have to apply for the service. And the application looks like this. I think this application has changed since the last time we gave this presentation, and even from the last time I had to apply for access. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to paste this onto the chat so everyone has that. Good. So once you have access to OpenAI, the next thing is you do have to provision the Azure OpenAI as an Azure service. So this would be the same process for provisioning any other Azure resource. Then 3, I'll show you a very simple integration into a Python development tool. And this is a Python development tool that allows you to interact with the GPT models through code. So not just like ChatGPT, for instance. And that's how you can start sort of building some very simple systems. And talking about simple systems, we're going to go to Databricks, which is the live Python environment that I set up for this demo. And we're going to actually show how to create your own GPT-powered custom Q&A bot based on whatever document that you have in hand today. And if you notice, this slide is actually in a live Python environment right now, and hopefully it works. Just check some ground truth. There you go, 1 + 1 = 2. So we're actually going to come back here after I show you the environment, and we'll go through an example of what this technology is great at, and how we just build something pretty simple. So a resource group, a minimalistic resource group that you would need to get this running can look somewhat like this. So when you do have OpenAI access, click to create OpenAI. And if you do this here, everyone can see this and everyone can hit create, even if you didn't apply for it. And sometimes your application might take a few days. You will know that it went through once this pricing tier, you have the standard S0 available. That was one point of confusion early on. That I just sort of like to point out to people. Once your application is accepted, it's right there. So if we go back to the resource group and actually click on the resource to see what it looks like. So this resource gives you an endpoint to interact with a copy of the Azure OpenAI models. So you go to keys and endpoint, and you will see that all the information you need to connect to this is there. So let me actually go ahead to Azure OpenAI Studio and sort of show you how it looks. So this is the first time I want to make this point that ChatGPT, that is the OpenAI serving of that model. OpenAI is their own company that allows you to purchase endpoint access. Now, Azure OpenAI works differently. How Azure OpenAI works is that you do not make a call outside of what is in your Azure environment. So what happens here, you see all of these models here, they're called concurrency query 001. So before I provision these models, there was nothing here. And the reason is that before you provision a copy of the OpenAI models, you cannot make a call to anywhere, because you're really not making data calls to anything outside of your Azure subscription or even your Azure resource group, if everything is contained in an Azure resource group. And that sort of is why using Azure OpenAI is safe when you're talking about PII information, HIPAA information, or any data that is highly sensitive, and you really don't want that escaping into the wild. And this is why, so this containerization way of serving this technology prevents any data leakages. Now, the models themselves as well, if you create a custom model, this model stays within your Azure subscription. So that model also cannot escape into the wild. So with that being said, here are the deployments. And to create a deployment is very simple. Now, GPT-4 is not available to the public, but it is available through a preview. When you can apply for it, and I'm actually going to create this deployment right now, and there you go. So all of a sudden we have GPT-4 to call on. So that's a brand new instance of GPT-4 that we have been able to provision. Now, if you go, there's these 2 tabs here, and allows you to interact with these models without any code. So I will actually choose DaVinci, and I can actually load any of the models here and click summarize points from financial report. There you go. There is some financial report. I click generate. And it generates very much like any of the OpenAI models would. And here you can choose any of the models that you have provisioned. And one final note before we move on to the next part. Everything that's used to fine-tune the models, if you choose to go down that route, sits here in this file management system. This files management system is also confined to your Azure subscription. So think about it as data sitting in your blob storage, for example, within that resource group. That's the same level of privacy that you have by having data here in this resource. So there's really no difference as far as security is concerned with that. All right, so you have this. So let's say now you have this resource running, and really you're interested in building a system. And the best way to the first stab at it is through, I like Databricks. You could also use Azure ML, has a pretty nice live Python environment you could use. And really any Python environment that is right for your business that can make API calls to OpenAI. I'm going to run this code live. So there's some Python imports that we need to get the system running. And this is the information that is specific to our instance of OpenAI. So this is what all of these calls are encrypted. They are HTTPS REST API calls. So first of all, I have to sort of ask for the models that I'm going to use for the session. As then you can see, I'm using our versions of DaVinci 3 and Ada. So DaVinci 3 is a completions model. It works a lot like ChatGPT. And Ada is an embedding model. It just takes bits of text and encodes it in a vector of numbers. I'll click on that. And the implementation can be as simple as this. So this is the full function. It says it's like ask question. You put a question in here, and the prompt is basically as simple as Q, that's a question, A is the answer, and then you have some hyperparameters of the models here. So really anything too complicated. And then now we can test this, okay? So what is the largest country by landmass? Russia is the largest country by landmass. Okay, so that's correct. So let's go to the next question. What is the largest country by population? The largest country by population is China. Great. So let's do a third question. When was okay, so first of all, for anyone who is not aware of this, early 2023, we had a very big and public event with Chinese spy balloons flying over United States territory. And this happened in 2023. So I want to ask the GPT model, when was Chinese spy balloon first spotted over American territory? And he gives me an answer. The first Chinese spy balloon spotted over American territory was October 1944. Well, that doesn't sound right. And that's what we are, in the business, we're calling hallucinations. Hallucinations is when GPT does not have a good answer for this, but it just sort of guessed. And he guessed in 1944. But there's a reason for this. This is not just random. So let's figure out why hallucinations happen. So Da Vinci 3, the training data goes up to 2021. So there's no way that Da Vinci has seen an article on this event that happened in 2023. But I really wanted to know, how is it pulling 1944? Did something in that year happen? And my first Google search, I encountered this. When Japanese balloons threatened American skies during World War II. It's like, okay, we're getting closer. World War II, 1944, that matches. This was behind a paywall, so I had to make another Google search, but a little bit more targeted. And here it is. 1944, there was a real event in which there was an operational launch of balloons that were meant by the Japanese to carry ordinances to the West Coast. So if we piece it all together, what happened here? We asked GPT, when was the spy balloon first spotted over US territory? It didn't really have a good answer for that because it didn't have the relationships in between the words I used weren't strong enough. But it did at some point in its training in 2021 was trained on this information here of a real event that happened in 1944. All right, so what we're going to do is this. We're going to try again, but with safeguards against guessing. So GPT is actually remarkable, and it knows when it doesn't have a very concrete source of information. So this is the old prompt, and this is what we're going to add here. On top of it is answer the question as truthfully as possible. And if you're unsure of the answer, say, sorry, I don't know. And I'm going to call this function now answers questions truthfully. So this is all there is to it. There's nothing extra. We hit on it and say, sorry, I don't know. So let's say you had HR documents for employee benefits, and you need a Teams bot in which your employees can go and ask benefits questions or employee handbook questions. That is something you really don't want a model to hallucinate, because then it will say, well, he gave me an answer. And the reason is that if it does give someone an answer that is not based on your content, it will be based on something that he saw in its training in 2021, which is not what you want. So the natural follow-up question is like, okay, great. That's nice, but doesn't help me because I need to incorporate my information onto this GPT model. And really, it can be anything. So let's say you have, so this is an example of current events. The reason I chose this is because a lot of people know of this event in 2023. And the information that I can use to bring into the prompt is available for everyone. But again, this could be product manuals from a customer. This could be HR documents and really any text data. And if you have, even if you have a PII or HIPAA information, again, if that information is already sitting in your Azure resources today, in your Azure subscription, using this new resource, you have, it's a very equivalent security-wise. So you don't expect any models to be trained on your data or any of your models to be utilized by any other entity aside from your organization. All right, so how does this work? So how do I take custom, how do I make custom documents part of this Q&A bot? And that comes back to that embedding example that we talked earlier about. So you have this ton of documents and a question comes in. So Ada is an embedding model. And what Ada does is it has read through all of the documents and it's created a numerical representation of bits of documents. And then the question comes in, and on the fly, you can ask Ada to then take that that question in English and also create a numerical representation. And then this step right here, what you can do is you can go through the documents that you have with the questions you have, and use the ADA results to pull the relevant information for your question at hand. And once you have that, then Da Vinci takes over and say, hey, I actually have the information to answer this question now. Let me go ahead and answer it. And that is the simplest way that you can build a Q&A bot quickly to see this sort of technology work firsthand, right? So the natural question is now, okay, well, I need something for documents here. I have to be able to index something through ADA, so I need to decide what I'm going to use for the source. And what I did is I actually scraped the Wikipedia page here for the 2023 Chinese balloon incident. So I scraped all of the text that you see in this on the wiki page, and there's some additional functions that need to happen because this is a little bit more complicated. They're not such straightforward questions anymore. But what I got out of that is a new function that says answer questions truthfully with wiki. And basically that just means that if I use this function, it's going to pull information from the Wikipedia page and try to answer it. So when was Chinese spy balloon over American territory? Okay, from January 28 to February 4th, 2023. Great. So it's been able to ingest that information. So let's take a quick look under the hood. What was included in the prompt? What did really happen? So this is basically the same exact question, but this time I want to know what ADA surfaced to help answer. So here's the prompt. Answer questions truthful as you can. Say I don't know if you can't. And in the context is 1, 2, 3 bits from the document. So 3 paragraphs. And I want to point out this third paragraph starts from February 28th to February 4th. Was spotted in North America airspace. So it's almost 1-to-1 there. So once you had this inside the context, then you send all of this information plus your question, and all of a sudden it was able to answer, okay, from February 28th to February 4th. And this happens automatically. So let's do a couple more questions here. What was the spy balloon's intended destination? Guam and Hawaii. Okay, that's checks. When was the first spy balloon down by U.S. Air Force? February 4th, 2023. Okay, and then how high was the balloon when it was down by the U.S. Air Force? 60,000 to 60,000 feet, 18 to 20 kilometers. So basically, the accuracy is much better once you do have context information available. And once you do have context information available, then that prevents some of the hallucination that we see. And the takeaway here is that, you know, with just a live Python environment and a few lines of code, we were able to get a GPT-powered Q&A bot. We could leverage GPT 3.5 Turbo and turn this into a chatbot. So not something that just gets hit with one question and one answer, but an entire different user experience based on the information that are sitting in whatever documents you want to use for reference. And that concludes the demo. And I think it's question and answer.
Back to the deck for a minute, and then we'll hit question and answer. Nice job, Alessandre.
Thank you.
I think an important question came up about design of the privacy of the solution. And one of the things that you did a great job of hitting that, Alessandre. I'll just give you a diagram that kind of shows this in action. When you deploy OpenAI in the context of your Azure environment, it becomes your instance, your endpoint of OpenAI with your own key and your own data. This becomes your environment that you're managing. So if you're building an app that needs to handle data in a certain way, It's your accountability to build that app that handles data in a certain way. The model itself isn't changing with your data. This is something that's somewhat static. This is an opportunity for you to be able to build it in a way that is yours. One thing that's really interesting that some people may want to leave on or not leave on is there is a feature within the OpenAI service boundary that looks for misuse of platforms associated with OpenAI, very specific use cases. That is something that you can leave on and provides an opportunity for you to know if that type of misuse has been requested from your platform. Or you can turn it off if you're uncomfortable with that alerting system being on. So you can see right here, there's this alerting system. That is something that when it is on, Microsoft engineers have access to. So they do have an ability to be able to see what the alerting system for misuse might be triggering off of. However, if your production system, you don't want that enabled, that's something that you can turn off. So that's important to be aware of, because that's the only area that that there might be a triggering that someone else outside of your organization would be able to see what's triggering the misuse scenario. But that is something that you can disable based upon your organization's requirements. So that's important to know. Also important to understand OpenAI's pricing model. So in terms of, it's actually kind of fascinating how inexpensive OpenAI actually is, especially when you're just getting started. But companies can sometimes be concerned about that because it's like, wow, this is a large model and it's my own instance. Like, what does that look like? It's important to understand that for each area of OpenAI, you're paying for usage. So you're paying for tokens is kind of the most significant thing that ends up happening. Tokens are simply the requests that you're placing into a system. And what you can see is that based upon the model you're using, the token cost differs. So a less complicated model will have a less significant token cost, whereas a more significant model might have a more significant token cost. And that's allows you to be able to use the most appropriate model for the use case. You can also see that there's training costs and hosting costs based upon different types of models. All things that kind of in and of themselves are relatively minor, and also allows you to be able to calculate it based upon the scale of your platform. So it is when you move from a pilot to a production pilot to a production system, it does give you an ability to be able to expect what the future cost of a platform would be, so you can be aware of it and plan for it. Okay, so I want to give a little bit of insight, and then we're going to hit questions on how companies get started with this. Like, what are the steps? If you're trying to, what have we seen be successful and what have we seen be less successful? So the most successful approaches kind of start down this road of getting people excited, getting people interested. One of the things that's been really fascinating to me has been who knows about ChatGPT and who doesn't. Some sessions I go into, everyone knows about ChatGPT and they're excited about applying it to their company. Other ones, maybe their kids told them about it, or they may have heard about it, but they haven't used it themselves. So sometimes you're even starting with just exposing them to the ChatGPT experience so they even know this is a thing. So the first thing a lot of companies do is they start with doing a group envisioning session. And these are when you take your company together and you say, I'm going to get 5 to 100 people, and we're going to bring that group together in a cross-functional way and help them to be able to do an art of the possible session. We just recently did this with a company. I've got that later in a screenshot where they brought 100 people together. It was 10 teams. They all went off into these separate groups, came back with 10 ideas per team, talked about their top 3. And it was just fantastic. Like the number of ideas that this company was able to come up with that now enable us to be able to figure out which are the best ideas was fantastic. So this is a great way to get started, just to make this not just an IT journey. And that's an important statement, is that the success of these projects is not like the success of deploying a new workstation or Office 365 solution. This requires your business's investment because you're delivering business value. And the more that you get the business excited about this being a thing, and especially take a little bit of the fear notion off that this is going to take away everyone's jobs. Maybe it might change their job, but it certainly is going to modify, certainly an opportunity for them to be able to be part of the transformation. This is a great place to start. Rank ideas, vote, and then move it into the next stage, which is evaluating the scenario. And these are the 3 most important elements to deciding if your idea is the right idea. The first and most important thing is, do you have data to be able to execute on your idea? And that's where sometimes the low-hanging fruit can be better than the one that's a bigger fruit that you have to climb the ladder for. The low-hanging fruit is sometimes like, I've got manuals already. I've got my HR onboarding document. I've got my my truck support manual. I can onboard that data relatively easily and let my customer service or sales or internal people start taking advantage of it today. So sometimes availability of data wins in that case because you're able to kind of get a couple wins under your belt. The next part is, does it have return on investment? Will my employees, my customers or partners, will they get benefit from this being part of their new picture? Will they say, wow, this is impressive. This is something that's different and better than what I was doing before. Or am I making more money, or am I operationally efficient as a result of this? The return on investment has to be there. And then the last item is, do you have a business sponsor? Especially when you're transforming the business group. They need to be on board. They need to be excited. They need to be willing to invest their time to say, yep, these are the 10 questions that I want this to answer correctly every time. And we want to make sure that the results of these comply with this specific kind of request. And getting that business sponsor investment allows you to ensure that your evaluated scenario is the right one to move forward with. The next thing we see people do is then they take that scenario and they move it into pilot. And that's essentially the same requirements from 2, and then bringing that forward into a constrained timeline, usually like 4 weeks-ish, to be able to say, in this period of time, I want to be able to show value, a realistic set of first goals. Like, I'm not going to build this platform for every manual we have or every piece of data we have or every operational process. I'm just going to pick this one in this specific scenario. So we can very objectively show that this is delivering value for that scenario. We then have to have an understanding of the success, and then what happens? If this is successful, what happens next? That's when you move into production. And really what we've seen from the production rollout is it's brick by brick. It's a scenario where you get this initial release and the company's excited about it. They're starting to get value. And then they move into a position where, wow, like I can do this. What about this? What about this? What about this? Or here's an issue I've had. Here's another issue I've had. Here's another issue I've had. And you start to iterate on those scenarios to be able to continue to raise the value to the organization. And it's really critical that you can continue to measure the adoption and business value as it moves into production. And also really critical that you can measure the impact. One of the things that we've seen as we've rolled out these solutions into production has been oftentimes companies aren't tracking the thing that's important to them until they roll this out, like time to quote. Like, how long am I actually taking to quote? How long am I actually taking to engineer the new solution based on the requirements from the customer? How long does it take me to answer the question that came in? Like, really understand that data. And then being able to track who used the tool to answer it, who didn't use the tool to answer it, and what's the delta. And as you move into that, that's where operationalization comes into play. We haven't really talked about MLOps here, and we will at some future event. But MLOps, comes on the tail end or in kind of in conjunction with the production deployment to say, all right, this is my production deployment. How do I roll out new changes to it in a way that allows me to achieve success? And as I do that in conjunction with my production iteration, I gain a set of operational confidence that lets the business then start to trust this as a key part, essentially right in way of how it delivers for its customers. And doing so really, again, starts with having the right ideas. So this is an agenda example of that envisioning session. We had just previously done this at Generac Power Systems and got all these people together, talk about the ideas, 45 minutes, break out into groups, answer a bunch of questions about, start to prompt people to think about what's important to them and how we make the opportunities real in their organization, and then bring that back to the broader group so they can take action on it. So this is what I invite you to think about as you start to think about your questions and as you fill out the survey at the end here. Is we would love to be part of your journey, either in a group envisioning session, in helping you evaluate a scenario, or in a pilot. The first 2 we'll do for free. We'll do that just as part of what we want to do to help people and really be part of your journey. And If that's successful, then we'd love to help you with executing us on a pilot to bring this into a production opportunity within your organization and make it something real for your business. So as you start to look at what you're going to do next, we would love to be part of that through any one of these 3 scenarios so you can start to achieve value from the solution. So with that, I think we've got some time for questions just here at the end. If we want to answer those or ask anything we haven't answered in chat, Amy, go shoot.
Let's see if anybody wants to type in another question. You can go ahead.
Better question. Did we answer all the questions that were posted previously, right? I think there were questions regarding hallucination. I think we covered those already, but I want to make sure that there are nothing missing from anyone before the call ends.
That's a good question. SharePoint access, really just another data source. So if you have data in SharePoint, that's been a common repository that we would gather information from. Ultimately, you need to choose somewhere that data exists, and SharePoint's sort of as good as any in a sense. We might pull it out into a blob. I don't know if Alessandro, you want to go into that, but ultimately, SharePoint's a fine place for us to grab data from.
Yeah, really, any data source that contains text data can be pulled into the Azure OpenAI resources and leveraged to build a system.
Can you connect to multiple repositories? Asked by Andrew. SharePoint, Salesforce, knowledge base. The answer is yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, currently there are ways to interact with SharePoint right now, right? So you will have to do some interesting things to it. I'm not going to disclose anything more than that in terms of further. I mean, currently you can do it, right? You can use any, as long as there is a data and there are ways to access it, you can actually use it as a data source.
Scott is asking, if data is restricted in SharePoint, is it also restricted to GPT?
Well,
If you're referring to like just permission structures, those 2 things would be independent of each other. You'd have to code for it, which I suppose you could. But that would not be something that just kind of like translates through on its own right now. If you had applied yeah, go ahead.
Your question is, I think, more related to governance, right? At that point, rather than GPT. GPT is its own standalone system that's going to do whatever it's going to do. You need a governance structure in place between whether or not, if the SharePoint data is restricted, you need the GPT's answers to be restricted as well, right? It's related, but it's a different question. It is different in the sense that this is now governance, data governance, rather than data access, right? GPT is just another tool at that point. I mean, call it a glorified search engine. I'd hate to say it that way, but that's what it is at that point. And what comes out of it, you need a different mechanism for safeguarding that data, both in and out. So it's a different. Your question is related, highly related, but it's a different ways to attack that particular result. Another question, can you connect multiple repositories? I would say the short answer is yes. Alexandre, would you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, we're even the systems that we build today, they're rarely from a single repository, yeah. Right? They're across many different data sources, sometimes across multiple systems. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the examples that you saw, right? It's going to be interacting with warehouse and different data that come from EMS systems, that kind of stuff. So you are looking at multiple data sources. It's a matter of overlapping and figuring it out, right? And figuring out the vectors that comes along with it.
And I think we have time just, or is it just one? I don't know, but Eric is
Yeah,
asking,
one more, that's probably it.
what directions do you see enhancements to these sorts of solutions? Solution architectures going with the things like evaluation of large language models, accuracy and hallucinations, enforcing AI safety, or introducing planning or other scaffolded features to the designs? That's a long question.
That is a very good question. So when you say the first mention of the word accuracy, the follow-up question is accuracy of what? So sometimes the workflows allow you to compute an accuracy. So let's say I want something to look at a piece of text and pull a number that exists on the piece of text. Well, that number is a binary. It can either be correct or incorrect. So you can compute the accuracy on that. Now, let's talk about tone. So if you have a chatbot and the tone is not necessarily what one person thinks about, but it is more appropriate in another person's opinion, that becomes much more difficult to compute. So the long answer is it's not a simple this is what you do. It's very system dependent. It is workflow dependent, and it is even the model that you choose dependent. And I think it's important. And when we do design systems, I think it's crucial that we have these sort of the evaluations of performance and evaluations of security in place day one, so that these are not an afterthought after you design a system, but they're truly integrated throughout the entire development cycle.
All right, gentlemen, I think that was our last question for today. Super appreciative of everything that you did to get ready for this, and looking forward to talking about where we can go next with every company here. So have a great afternoon. Thank you for spending time with us, and hope that this is a great start to your journey.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah,
Thanks to all our presenters. Great job. Thank you.